Steeped in the rich tapestry of Yoruba heritage, Àsìkò stands at the forefront of a cultural renaissance, weaving captivating narratives through the interplay of art and technology. With deep reverence for his roots, he harnesses the potential of AI to breathe life into ancient stories, infusing them with contemporary allure. It's time to dive in.
Àsìkò, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing good, Yuri. How are you doing?
I'm good. You tell me a little behind the scenes that you have a brand new member of the family. Welcome us.
Yeah, a beautiful boy. His name's Ayomide, which means our joy has come. Yeah, so a bit chaotic. I'm in his room. My studio is currently getting refurbished, so there's a lot going on in my world at the moment.
Well, it's exciting. It's exciting. This is your first child. No, you have a kids before, right?
No, first.
First child. Wow!
Yeah.
Congratulations. Hey,
Thank you.
I remember how fun it is, but I don't miss the evenings and not being able to sleep. So I wish you the best with all of that.
How many kids have you got?
I had two girls. I have a
Wow.
10-year-old and to be 7, and that's the perfect age, man, because they're kind
Okay.
of self-sufficient. They're their own little person. They do their
Yeah.
own thing.
Yeah.
You know, they still want to hang out with you before they become teenagers. You know, and so I'm enjoying the moment for sure.
Nice.
Hi, I was reading recently a wonderful article about you on CNN Styles.
Okay.
And it was very interesting how much you were able to delve deep on your work, you believe in your heritage and all of those things. When you were given the opportunity to talk about your work, what's the one thing that for you that you want people to walk away with? The most important thing that you want people to designate about what you do?
I think it's a good question. Good question. I think for me, it's that Africa and Nigeria, where I'm from, but Africa as a continent has a lot to offer. Um, it is a beautiful place, which is really still undiscovered, in my opinion. Even among us Africans, we haven't fully discovered the beauty of this place in its entirety, and we don't fully understand the value of what we have. And so, through my work, um, it is to edify, it is to amplify, it is to show the beauty of the place, the beauty of the people, the beauty of the culture and the heritage from where I'm from. And that's one of the things I want people to walk away with is how beautiful Africa is and how beautiful my country is, Nigeria, and how beautiful and resilient the people are. And so that comes through in the work I create. It is to show it in its full breadth, in its beauty, in its rawness, in its flaws as well, in everything.
What are some of perhaps the misconception that people have from Africa or Nigeria that you think it's important to highlight and important to eradicate it and correct it as well?
I think a misconception. I remembered when I moved to the UK. One of the big misconceptions is we didn't speak English that well, or we lived in, and it was quite shocking actually because there was a perception that we possibly lived in huts or something of that nature. And this was me in coming here in the 90s/2000, and this was in school, and it is quite mind blowing because you know my father, was a professional. He was an accountant, or he's an accountant, retired now, but he was an accountant. My mom was a chartered accountant. They had a good family home. We had, people like a butler and a person who takes care of the grounds. So it wasn't, and my dad had a nice house that was designed by an architect. So it was so far away from what was people envisaged. And in school we learned English. Obviously, we learned Yoruba as well, which is my native tongue. and you had the opportunity to learn other languages. I learned a little bit of French at the time.
Hmm.
So there's that misconception that the education system, Africans are not that educated, or we don't have technology, we don't have infrastructure. It's different to living in the UK, but it is very much present there. And through my artwork, that's one of the things I show, that the people are resilient, they are sophisticated. Even before the Europeans came, during the colonial times, we had infrastructure and communities and structures in our society. It wasn't that we were all in, but I think there's a perception that we're all in the bush hunting animals. And there are aspects to some tribes or some cultures that are like that. The Maasai, they are nomads. They don't really have homes. They build a home where they are, and that's a cultural thing.
Hmm.
But Africa is such a diverse and amazing place. And I'm now taking a lot of my holidays in Africa, while I do some research as well on projects, because it is such a beautiful place. There are so many undiscovered things there. So I would implore people who have no idea about Africa, or who are, from African descent but don't really know, I would implore them to take a trip down to Africa. It's such a beautiful place. There is a lot to see and do. It is very different from where you are coming from, because Africa is like nowhere on this planet, in terms of how it's set up, in terms of its wildlife, in terms of its landscape. It's like nowhere. But it's something to be discovered.
More often than none, when usually I'm also an immigrant. I'm from Brazil, then moved to the United States.
Okay, okay.
Our parents are looking for a better opportunity for us.
Mm,
They're better,
mm,
when they live in the countries and things like this.
mhm.
When you moved to, how old were you when you went to the UK?
So I was actually born in the UK. My parents
Okay.
met here, in London. They came for their university, back in the day, and they met here. They got married, and then they had me here in the UK. And then the opportunities in Nigeria were amazing at the time. Oil had just been discovered. Everything, it was a boom time in the 70s, late 70s, in Nigeria. So there was a lot going on. So my dad moved back, with my mom and myself, and I stayed there till I was about 16, 17, and then moved back
Okay.
here, to do my university. And the idea would be I would move back. But I think for me, I decided not to move back. I found a different lifestyle, and something different for me. To be able to explore things is quite different, and it. I think living here allowed me to spread my wings and start living a very different life. I'm still very much connected to the motherland. I still go back, very often. I do work out there as well. So I'm not disconnected. It's just at this time in my life, I found this to be the right place for me to live at this time. And, I'm still considering going back from time to time.
Yeah, no, of course. And that's one of my follow up questions is that when you move to a new country, and sometimes there's a little bit, I'm speaking for myself, there was a little bit of a struggle to adapt to the
Mm,
language, to the new culture, but also try to maintain truth to your background.
mm,
And I think either you can connect with that or not. But for you, as you went back to college, how was the experience for you? I'm sure it's an exciting part of your life. You're in a new country, time to, to study and all of those things. But at what point did you realize that as much as my life is in UK now, I cannot let go of my roots. I can still need to be connected with my culture as well.
That's been a journey. That whole process you mentioned, that's all been a journey. Um, So when I first moved to the UK, I actually found it very hard. It was a new place, new way of thinking. I think that was my big challenge. It was such a different and new way of thinking about how to approach things that it took me a while to adapt and start. I guess being comfortable in my skin, and then moving to the UK, you find out you're black as well, which is not something I had to ever contend with. The idea of this color of my skin was not something I thought about living in Nigeria. So that was another thing I had to contend with. I started school, so I what they call A levels after secondary school, but before university. So that was, trying to adapt to that, the schooling system. So for me, and when I moved here, my parents brought me here, stayed for maybe about a month, and then dropped me off. So I was living with my uncle. That as well was a bit of a challenge. I've been used to staying at home with my parents and my family, and then I'm now living with a relative that I don't really know in a foreign land. So it was a bit of a challenge. But as I grew older, I found how important my culture and my heritage are, and how they are the important parts and cornerstones in my identity as a person. And so over the years, when I lived in Nigeria, I didn't really regard my heritage because it was all around me and you take it for granted, and that was what I did. But after years living in the UK, I found that's the being Nigerian is a strength, and it's something I need to lean on. And being Yoruba, the values, the ethics, the culture, all of that stuff is a cornerstone for me. So I started to explore what it is to be Nigerian, but in doing that, I started my journey as a photographer and as an artist, and so that exploration was two sides. It was me in my personal life, and then it paralleled in my artwork.
What came first? It was the search about your culture that eventually you wanted to capitalize and express it through your art in photography, or through art, you eventually started getting more interested in the subject of heritage and culture as well?
It's a good question. Um, that's a very good question. I never thought about which came before the other. Is it the chicken and the egg? So which actually came before? Um, I'd possibly say art helped, or art allowed me the freedom to research, to explore, to dive deep into understanding certain things about myself, about my culture, my heritage, what the structures are of my culture or heritage, why I am the way I am in this space living in the UK. So I'd say art gave me that freedom to do that. And it became the, I guess, the signpost to continue that journey, to explore. And maybe it's the art that gave me that inquisitive mind. I mean, the inquisitive mind was always there, but the freedom to be able to do that was the art side of things. And so for me, it helped. I guess I was always an artist, even though I, worked in a very completely different field of work. But, as time went on, I became a full-time artist. So it was always there for me to explore.
Doing that exploration,
Mm,
were there anything specific that stand out to you, that even surprised you about your culture, that you weren't aware, that perhaps was something that your parents didn't share with you, that wasn't exposed to you in your early age, that you'll
mm,
find out later in life, that kind of really made an impact on you?
yeah. So in exploring things, you find out that there are things that are don't agree with your ethics as a human being, or there's a dark side to any culture, as beautiful as it might be, whether you're in Western civilization or you are in, countries like Africa or Brazil, wherever. There's certain cultural things which are challenges. So, for one, um, I was speaking to a lady, and she's from Somalia. So she told me about how in on her 13th birthday she was cut, and when I mean cut, is female genitalia mutilation was performed on her. Now, this is a cultural thing in Somalia, which I never heard about, but it's a form of circumcision on the female vagina. So I was quite surprised by that, and being the inquisitive mind that I am, I did some research and I found it's something that happens in my Yoruba heritage as well, which was quite surprising, and it's not something I'd heard about. And so I made a body of work about that. Speaking to all these different women and their traumas psychologically, the psychological trauma, the physical trauma, and I used that to those interviews to make a body of work called Conversations, and it's about the conversations
Mm.
we need to have in Nigeria about these cultural practices. Now, that's not something I knew before, but through exploration, I discovered that. And there are other things as well, like how women are treated by men, and because it's the culture has patriarchal structures to it. Now, there are great things within the culture where women have positions of power and have a level of I guess it's equality, and women are allowed and being able to do certain things. And some of those things changed when the colonial period happened, because what was happening in England, the Nigerians tried to emulate that, so they suppressed women based on that. Um, so I think that was one of the things I learned just during my explorations into culture, and to be able to deal with that, I make work uh, about that.
Often enough, we are all not challenged, but we're incentivized to celebrate culture, which I think is a great thing. But now you're referring a part of a culture that can be painful, and there is their own, dark side.
Mm,
Do you feel like sometimes it's okay then to not not deny, because you can't deny what's happening, but to be critical of culture as well, be critical of heritage, and critical of some of customs that
mm,
perhaps, as much as so embedded in someone's cultures, and you want it to be respectful, but still perhaps should pass go beyond that practice.
I mean, I agree with that. I think um, as we evolve as human beings through cultural exchange, through me getting to know what the big wider world is about, through connections, through the internet, I get to start to understand the paradigms of my cultural experience, of my experience as a person living in the UK. And this happens with everybody. We start to grow and evolve as a people. Um, and so we have to challenge certain aspects of our culture or heritage. Now, our culture is beautiful. It is amazing. It is the structures that have held society for years before, but not everything is. Culture is a man-made construct. Essentially, it is not.
Mm.
It's man-made to help societies live within. I guess it's done to help societies live and have structure and have formality. So because of that, it is not perfect and needs to be fine tuned from time to time. We can't continue to always say everything in the past was perfect. It can't be, because this is how the world is. If everything was perfect, then the world would be, a perfect place, but it is not. Um, so we have to challenge those things. But I think the thing to do is to have conversations and bringing people to the table, not in a way to attack the culture, but to have a conversation. I think it's very challenging in this day and age. It's very hard. Everybody's on one side, or the person's on the other side. Nobody wants to hear the other person. My side is right. No, your side is wrong. My side. But it's like,
Mm.
let's have this conversation, because we, not one person has all the answers, and we can learn to live amicably together. So I think, when the issues of culture, and that was what, that exhibition conversations was to have conversations about female genitalia mutilation and violence against women. And it was very important to have men there because, you know, it is important for us to instill this into our sons, into the men around us, to have these conversations that this is something that happens in our heritage. And so when we have daughters, we have to have that thought process to know that, okay, these things are wrong and they need to be addressed.
Usually when I have conversation with friends about heritage and culture, and I find myself sometimes separating both a little bit. And tell me how you feel about this. I would love to hear your inputs. So a lot of times when I think about heritage, I think about tradition, something that our ancestors, heritage is part of culture as well.
Yeah.
But I see more as a tradition.
Okay.
And history based, something like looking back to our ancestors and culture in that aspect. Now, culture per se, a lot of times I always see more is a combination of the heritage, but also the present and expectations of the future. It's more of a living, breathing thing that can evolve. Like as heritage, it is what it is. It has been. Culture is how we transform heritage to something new, and that's what culture could be or it is. I don't know. What do you think about that?
That is a very, very good way of looking at it. I'd never really thought about it that way because I always look at heritage, as tradition. But I always think that's the things that are passed down, through my family. And so sometimes it can be a bit of a smaller scope to it, but the culture is everybody's involved in that. But I love that way of looking at it. And the culture is a living, breathing thing, and it's one of those things that we should be curating in a way, in some, because there is the societal culture and then there is
Yes.
the personal one as well. So, how do I run my household? What do we believe in my household and for my generations to come? How would I edit certain things? So let's say the culture doesn't move away from FGM, but I decide in my household that this is not something we will do to our daughters moving forward, and so we don't. And then in that way, from my descendants passing down, that's no more there, or it's been edited out. Or in the way I greet different people, how will I decide to do that when I meet them? In Nigerian culture, people sometimes prostrate or they kneel, just depending. But obviously, that's kind of evolved and changed over the years with westernization. So it's now slight bow as opposed to going completely down. But then if you meet your elders, you still do that. So how do I structure these things within my worldview moving forward? And I think we have to edit the culture that we have as personal people, because what works best for your life? You used to live in Brazil, but you now live in the US. Certain things you might not be able to do them anymore if you followed culture like to the bone. You might not be able to do them anymore. You have to edit it based on where you are and what you're doing, and kind of work out what works best for your life. But you have the backing of your culture to give you strength and to also give you a moral compass on how you navigate this world.
Yeah, I find that concept incredibly powerful. That you can implement culture with your own households and your own inner circle of families, and of course, using some of the backbone of a strong moral compass from your country and your heritage, where it comes from, and perhaps you see that like as a parent. My kids were born here, so I tried my best to implement them to the culture, what it was like growing up in Brazil. But at the end of the day, they were born here, so they have a different point of view and perspective. So it's a struggle, but yet it's an interesting to watch, because then they come to you and ask questions about things of your culture that you're like, oh, that's a very interesting. And it forced me also to reconnect, to be more in tune with the history of my country, so I can be better inform her when they have questions.
Mm-hmm.
I think if a very that aspect of culture that you can implement it in a way that's more personal and you can make choices, and
Mm-hmm.
it's can be very transformative. It doesn't really chain yourself to, I have to do this because that's how it's done
Yeah.
before, and that's what is expected from me for being a man from this part of the world or a woman from this
Mm,
part of the world.
mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean that's a very, very good point. And so I've got a little boy now, and so I'm
Hmm.
thinking, what am I passing down? So one of the big things is the language. Now, that's been a bit of a challenge. I can speak Yoruba, but my Yoruba isn't great. I can hear perfectly and I can even write. But speaking, because my parents never did speak because they had this influence of westernization. And so they would speak to one another, but they wouldn't speak to us, which was really
Yeah.
challenging. So I understand Yoruba and I can speak it, I can write it, but when I speak it among some of my friends, or when I go back home to Nigeria and I speak it, it's like it doesn't come across. It doesn't come across well because the accent's a bit funny and it's just not the
Yeah.
best. But I want to be able to pass this down because language is such a powerful, um, what's the word? Powerful tool within culture. So I want to be able to pass that
Hmm.
down. So I'm now wrestling with this idea, and I don't speak Yoruba with my wife. So I'm now having to think, well, what do I need to do to pass this on to my kid? Because I want him to know the language.
Yeah.
And so you have to
Yeah.
be intentional about these things. And, I love living in the UK, but he has to be built up knowing his culture is amazing. It is a place of beauty. Nigeria is great. It's not perfect, but it's great, and he should have pride in where he's come from. He is British, but he is also Nigerian, and
Yes.
that's who I am as well. I'm both of those things, and I don't shy away from being both of those things.
Yes. I agree. And again, go back to the strength to have out. You know who you come from, who you
Mm,
are, and you can choose
mm,
which part of you want to embrace it more.
mhm,
Man, parenting is hard as it is, and then we throw
mm.
culture on top of that.
Yeah,
Hey, listen.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
I
know how
get it.
you're
I get. It, I
doing
get.
it.
It. We know we can do the best we can. And both of my daughters, as much when they were little, I used to speak Portuguese to them all the time.
Okay,
I'm married to an American, so
okay,
she doesn't speak Portuguese either. So we don't speak Portuguese in the house.
okay.
But the older my kids were getting, I found it was very difficult to educate them and have a meaningful conversation that could
Mm,
explain things more complex in
mm,
Portuguese because it was a little bit going over their head. So I always
mm.
kind of fall back in English because that's where they go to school,
Of course.
their friends, their
Mm,
peers. So they might be able to hear a little bit, but they don't really speak. But the interesting thing is, I used to travel to Shanghai quite a bit for work,
okay.
and one of my oldest daughter wanted to learn Chinese, and I'm like, yeah, sure, and in Korean, yeah, it takes a couple
Yeah, yeah,
classes and so on.
yeah.
And then the youngest wants to follow the oldest. Now they both speak more Mandarin than any other language in the household. So we have this very weird dynamic that among themselves they can speak
Speak my.
Mandarin, which
Wow.
and her mom and I have no idea
No
what they're
idea what the.
saying.
Ah, I think.
And
No, sorry, you're saying.
go ahead.
No,
No. It's just a different dynamic that has changed in the house. That
uh-huh.
I'm grateful that they gravitate towards that and they have something that belongs to them. You know what I'm saying? It's the
Mm,
sister thing.
mm.
And it's a different culture, different language, completely different alphabet as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
So I'm happy for that. But the same way I feel like, man, she should be speaking Portuguese instead. That's on me. So
yeah,
anyway, can
yeah,
win.
yeah. So they probably it was probably uh kids. I'm finding kids are really smart, and I can imagine
Yeah.
that they're trying. It's a way for them to speak without their parents knowing, so that they can do all sorts of things. But uh, isn't the world moving towards? I mean, I don't know how true this is, but China is becoming this very influential place on the world stage. So they're probably getting
Mhm.
a leg up in terms of business opportunities for the future.
Yes, yes. That if we want to spin this, it's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's just interesting going back to that spec. You gravitate towards things, right?
Mm,
As much as you are a combination of your parents, DNA and
mhm,
personality, but you get your own stuff happening, and they have this thing between themselves, the sisterhood thing that they have, that they
mm,
bound them together, that
mm,
they can communicate. I mean, they're
mm.
not fluently, but they can really
They
do super
can,
well. They've
yeah,
been
yeah,
doing it for a few years now.
yeah.
That belonged to them. It
Mm.
wasn't something that I provide the opportunity so that could
Course,
flourish, but they
course.
were the one who initiated it. They
Mm,
took leadership on those things.
yeah,
So you'll see your little ones will be the same way. You're gonna blink and he's gonna pick
yeah.
up on something that is very different and
Mm,
interesting, and you're just gonna be
mm,
like, I guess my job is just to be supportive and be here
hmm.
for what they need,
Yeah,
and then see what kind of person they become.
yeah. Uh, but I think off the back of that, I think something I mean, that I'm considering is, I want that. So Ayomide will go to, and I'm not actually just thinking of just Nigeria. I'm thinking of also other African countries, because Africa as a whole
Hmm.
has a lot to offer. So I want to make sure
Yes.
that he starts to, when he's getting older and he's becoming really cognizant and he can really see and understand things, I want him to start to experience that world. And then, you know, you know, I don't know if he'll be interested in what I do as an artist, but if those questions ever arise, then he will be able to see that his dad work was about this, was about illuminating or shining a light on the African continent, on his Yoruba heritage. That his name has a meaning that's come from, rooted in Yoruba heritage, and the people around him, as well, kind of feed into that as well. His uncles, his aunties are in this space. So even if I'm always wondering, because even I, in some ways, kind of strayed away. I wasn't really interested in my culture and heritage. I went off and did whatever I wanted to do. But I think I don't even know when that moment was where I decided to start exploring it. And maybe it was through my journey as an artist. But through all of that, I came back, and it's something I can draw strength from, because there's an identity thing that is very important in this day and age, because the internet is there and everybody's being swayed in all these different forms of identity. But one of the forms for me that holds true and has a power to it is where I'm from. And because I look back to look forward in the work that I create, and my communities do that as well. Those are the beautiful things I want to be able to instill. And I know it's going to be a bit of a crazy challenge, but it's something I'm looking forward to doing with him.
Yeah, but look how wonderful it will be that not only your son, but his entire generation will have your art, your work to look
Mm,
at and to
mm,
understand themselves.
mm,
You know what I'm saying? What you're creating right now will be part of uh, a global history, that they're going to provide them with tools and
mm,
visual cues
mm.
and material to kind of understand what the culture. For some, perhaps don't have opportunity to travel all the time, or to be living in the continent of Africa,
Yeah.
but at least they can somehow immerse themselves
Mm,
on that in that experience. And you're a
yeah.
part of this. Your
Yeah.
work is a part of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. This is true. This is true. I think that's a very strong point. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask you about the process now. I think we kind of delve very nicely about this whole behind the scenes and the
Sure.
culture and aspect of the background.
Hmm.
But you were someone also. I have a conversation with a lot of people about how we merge, art with technology, craft with new innovations and things like that. And you were very much doing that as well with your work,
Mm.
using your photography and implementing some AI elements as well. Um, Tell me a little bit of that, how that came about, how far you feel like you are with this approach. You want to continue to go this route,
Mm.
or it's more like experimental kind of approach for
Mm.
the most recently exhibitions?
So the AI thing, I hadn't even explored AI till August last year. Um,
Hmm.
and then it came across, I don't know where I came across it, but I came across, I guess it was an AI image or something. I was like, what is this? And then in my exploration, I found, oh, this is a thing. So it kind of opened up my world because for me, as you know, so I'm a photographer, but I think first I'm actually a visual artist that dabbles in all these different forms of creating whatever story I want to create. So in some cases, you know, I'm painting, or in some cases there's sculpture. In some cases I'm making a film. Um, so, but it's always about an image, and the image is always a starting point. So when I discovered this, it was, and I really went in. I spent probably about 3 months just. I think my wife used to complain and say, "I've got another wife" or something through the AI. So, because I just focused, because I found it intriguing to be able to create different worlds or use my imagination beyond what I've been doing. So I'm able
Hmm.
to create worlds within my photography, but adding the AI element to it expanded that exponentially. And so in some, I created a piece of work during that period for a museum in Nigeria, in Lagos, called the Yoruba Museum, at the John Randall building. And I was to create four different orishas. So orishas are, the deities, ambassadors of, of the single god, Olodumare within Yoruba culture. And I wanted to create all these things. So even like, Shango is the god of thunder. He's very similar to Thor. He has a hammer, and he's a warrior type character. But on the day of the shoot, I could never find the right hammer because am I gonna make Thor's hammer or make Shango's hammer? It just doesn't really work. Um, and
Mm.
I haven't got loads of millions like a Hollywood studio to prop somebody to make that hammer. So I used AI. I basically used AI to create the work. To create the hammer. I told it all the things I needed within the hammer, and when you create the hammer, then you take it out of the AI system, and then you work on it a bit, maybe change lighting or change certain aspects of it, and then you can put it in the hand of the image of the Shango character. So for me,
Mm.
AI is a tool to create. And for all those four images I created for the museum, they're kind of digital type collages, so they have different elements within them. So using AI for me, because I understand my culture and my heritage, and I understand through research, things on deities, mythology, I'm able to inquire from the AI what exactly I want to create and what it should look like, and what sort of orientation it should be to fit my initial photography image. So for me, it works. It is a very useful tool in that way. And I think maybe the AI system has become a lot better because, when I first started, when I would inquire certain things, it really wouldn't understand what I was asking, or it would make something that obviously it's based on the images out there. So it makes something that, is not the right thing. And I'd have to do a whole lot more work to
Hmm.
change it. But now I think the systems have got better and they understand certain nuances within the culture to be able to create things that I need. I also use it to create storyboards. I use it to create, lately I've been getting some work from people within the film industry So in terms of creating characters or creating different worlds, because of my understanding of culture and heritage, and how I'm also a little bit, I won't say a huge bit, but a little bit of combining a future aspect to it. So to be able to create all these different new worlds, it's great in that aspect. And so I'm enjoying this process. It's an addition, it's a tool. It's like my camera. My camera is a tool. It's like when I paint, it's a tool. It's just a technology driven tool as opposed to hand or using your own hands.
I'm lucky enough that I got the chance to talk to wonderful people like yourself and many others here on the show. And one thing that somebody highlighted to me that I didn't even think about until most recently, and I want to hear your opinion, is that a lot of times the AI is very much pulling images from the archive from the internet, right? So it's what's available. So
Mm-hmm.
this person was very much talking about how important it is more than ever to archive all the cultures on the internet,
Hmm.
because otherwise the eye won't have access what look like a hammer or a weapon for that part of the world would
Mm.
look like to really kind of
Yeah.
be historical
Yeah.
accurate.
Yeah.
So for him right now it's very much about do everything he can to put stuff up for his culture and do the research,
Hmm.
what it looks like, to the clothing, the I think we're very much talking about dishes, how people eat, how people
Hmm.
cook, that sort of thing culturally. So when
Hmm.
you ask the eye, they know what you're looking for instead of bringing it back to
But
Western
yep.
look
Yep.
like product or
Yep.
Western look like
Yep.
art or design or
Hmm.
mythology and things like that.
Yeah. And yeah, you're so right. I think that was one of my big challenges. So in some cases, I would say I need a fabric. So I'd say let's say I'll say a Yoruba Ankara. So Ankara means, it's the Yoruba fabric that's used, something like this.
Hmm.
So I'd say Ankara. The AI system wouldn't know what that means.
Yeah.
So I have
Yeah.
to go drill down in detail saying, I'm looking, I want to create this pattern, this sort of pattern with maybe birds and lions and this, or with a sort of symmetrical sort of, with flowers and stuff like that. And I would ask it and go drill down into more detail for it. And then, so in creating that, in a way, I'm kind of schooling it as this is what a Yoruba um, piece of fabric will look like. Because I still think the whole thing is learning. I don't fully understand the
Hmm.
intricacies of how it does learn, but I still think it's learning. So I think it's up to artists like us to, in some ways, teach it what these amazing cultural aesthetics look like.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. It's an interesting thing, as you mentioned. It's a very exciting technology, but still, there's flaws like
Of
everything else.
course,
So we just
of
have to
course.
understand that it's not absolute, it's not
Mm,
defined. That we
mhm.
need to kind of make sure that we're incorporating more of diversity, if within the AI. How crazy is
Mhm.
that? We talk about diversity all over the world,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
even with software intelligence, we need to make sure that it's
yeah,
diverse enough
yeah.
that can represent the people that serve it.
Hmm.
Hopefully,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, well, now, what's besides a lot of changing diapers coming your way? What else you working on, and what's next for you?
So at the moment, I'm working on some new work, some new collaborations with so a new body of work that I'm going to be shooting in about 2, 3 weeks. Uh, Still finalizing ideas in terms of story, but looking at women, power, cosmology, and Yoruba heritage. So that I'm quite
Mm.
excited to get back into the studio. Also, the work with the Yoruba Museum is yet to be dropped. It's just finished printing and framing, so it's going to be shipped over to Lagos in the next 2 weeks, and then we'll be going into the museum. So looking forward to that work going out there into the world. I just recently got back from New York, so one of my sculptures was bought by BNY Mellon, which is a bank in
Hmm.
New York, and they they have the sculpture in their lobby as you come into the bank, and so it was quite a beautiful moment to have this piece, which is about Black abolitionists in the UK, be in this space. And for me, that's a celebration to have my work in places where it wouldn't usually be. I have some work in Knightsbridge in London, and I've had some work in, in some prominent places in the UK. And it's to promote these conversations about, cultural heritage, but also about the Black experience living in the UK, because, parts of these cultures and these stories are British stories as well, because they're very much intertwined with the British history. So yeah, have quite a few things that I'm working on as well, just the new work, but looking forward to sharing that out today.
Well, before I let you go, there's three questions I ask everyone
Okay.
that comes to the podcast. And one is we want you to recommend a book for us,
Ooh.
um, a movie or a TV show, something to watch.
Ooh.
And who do you think we should have here in the podcast as a guest in the future?
Okay. Okay. These are very hard questions. Okay. Book. Book. Hmm. The problem is I rarely read fiction. I'm constantly just reading historical books. So I'm reading
That's
stuff,
perfect.
yeah, but not history as in these are historical accounts. So, for instance, I'm I'm reading African Textiles at the moment by Duncan Clark, but
Okay.
exactly it's about African textiles because I'm in research mode on working on collages and using African textiles in my work, sculpture. So it's not like oh, this is a fun story about this person or that person. This is research. But it's a great book, actually. It is a great book. It's looking at all these different textiles and the stories behind them. And you're in African culture. Textiles aren't just worn; there are stories to them. Different people use them in different ways. They tell what age you are. They can tell what time you are in your life based on what you're wearing, or you can tell if somebody's a monarch or royalty to a foot soldier or somebody of important. So for me,
Fascinating.
that's one of the things I'm enjoying it. So African Textiles by Duncan Clark.
Okay.
Film. Ooh, I don't get out much anymore. The kid has kind of clamped me down for the next couple of months, but I'm trying to
What
remember.
about like a favorite film? Doesn't
Uh,
need to be anything currently there.
um, hmm. Let me. I'll put forward something I want to watch, which is silly, but
Yes, let's do that.
so as a kid, I read a lot of graphic novels, and that also influences my work in being able to create these new different worlds and these new different universes. So I want to really see into the new Spider-Man, into the Spider-Verse, and also because it tackles, it's about, that journey of a person, their arc, which is always very interesting to me, but also the idea of, if you look at, so physicists have postulated that there are infinite universes. So in some universe right now, maybe our roles are reversed. Maybe I'm the one
Yeah.
interviewing, but and you're the artist. Or in some universe, maybe I've had 10 kids as opposed to one. So that's an interesting ideology. Just looking at how different our lives could be, and so you have all these different Spider-Man because their lives have been different because they're in different universes. So that's interesting to me. So
Yeah.
I want to check that out.
Well,
What?
I can say I've seen that movie. My
Yeah.
oldest loved Spider-Man, so we
Okay.
check it out, and it's a
Okay.
fantastic movie. I highly
Okay.
recommend it. If anyone get a chance to go see it, it's beautiful. The animation is outstanding. The
Yeah.
story is great. So go check it out if you get a chance for sure.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for the recommendation. Was there another question?
Who should we have as a guest? Who would you recommend?
So there is a force of nature, Victor Aquilome. He is, I can send you his details. He's amazing. He is one of the artists at the forefront in Nigeria right now, making amazing work. He's exhibited in museums and all over the world. He's very prolific. He's very intelligent, and he's a force of nature when it comes to uh, an artist. So Victor is somebody I would recommend. Another amazing artist that I follow and I look up to is Kehinde Wiley. He's in New
Hmm.
York. He's yeah, Kehinde is amazing. He's, he's an amazing artist too.
Well, we will make sure to reach out for sure. We'd love to
Sure.
have more intelligent and exciting people here with us. Àsìkò, I want to thank you so much for taking the
Thank you.
time. I know you, as you mentioned earlier, you have a brand new baby in the house and you're so busy with work. But your work, when we came across, was very inspiring. It was
Oh,
very
thank you.
emotional. We gravitate towards what we were looking for to have more understanding and conversation through art and express ourselves. So I'm thrilled we managed to talk to you. I want to thank you so much for taking the time, and I'm looking forward to see what you're doing next.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity with the Minded Podcast. I appreciate you guys.
Experience the world of art, design, and culture through Minded Podcast. Engage with groundbreaking artists, visionary designers, and cultural influencers and delve into their creative processes. Minded Podcast, powered by the CDA. New episodes every Tuesday.